The Korean game development scene is currently experiencing a massive boon, as Korean games are having their breakthrough moment in the Western world, with games like Black Desert Online finally getting localised in recent years, Lies of P releasing to rave reviews just last year, and Sony promoting Stellar Blade as one of the PS5's big tentpole releases since the PS5 reveal event in 2020. Back when it was still known as Project Eve. Now, after countless showings, Stellar Blade is finally here, and I'm glad to say it was well worth the wait, as Stellar Blade is fantastic. While Stellar Blade's clumsy story falls well short of the Nier games that Shift Up evidently drew inspiration from, Stellar Blade's immaculate combat, outstanding soundtrack, and stylish presentation make it one of the best action games of the generation. Taking place in a world where humanity has been pushed to the brink of extinction by monstrous creatures called Naytiba that destroy and slaughter with reckless abandon, Stellar Blade stars Eve, a member of the 7th Airborne Squadron, a platoon of female warriors sent from off-planet to reclaim Earth. Unfortunately for the 7th Squadron, their mission goes awry when they encounter a powerful alpha Naytiba that tears through the squad and leaves lone survivor Eve on the brink of death. However, when all hope seems lost, Eve is rescued by a scavenger, who is of course named Adam, because Stellar Blade's writing and naming conventions couldn't possibly be more on the nose. Now Eve is the only thing left standing between the Naytiba and their complete obliteration of the human race. Of course, Eve's not alone in her journey, as she has backup from Adam and another survivor she meets early in her journey, Lily. Lily was a survivor of the earlier 5th Squadron, who were deployed before Eve, and she serves as Eve's core pillar of support, building gear for Eve and upgrading her weapons and equipment. In Stellar Blade, most of the remaining remnants of humanity are confined to Zion, the last standing human city. So naturally, Zion is the first destination Eve heads to on her journey. But her presence isn't exactly met with a warm welcome. While some people are grateful at the prospect of her help, others are initially hostile towards Eve as an off-worlder. Many of these survivors feel like they've been abandoned and left to suffer in this dying world, while others thrive off-planet. So Eve has to slowly win the trust of these people by helping them with their problems. Stellar Blade's story takes more than a page out of Nier's book, and to be fair to them, the team at Shift Up have worn their inspirations on their sleeve, with Stellar Blade's creative director Hyung Tae Kim and Nier director Yoko Taro doing a joint interview where they discussed their admiration for each other's work. But Stellar Blade's similarities to Nier aren't always to its benefit. You have to be careful when drawing such clear inspiration from another story, as it inevitably invites comparisons to it, and if you don't have the storytelling chops to match that game, you run the risk of your game reading like a cheap imitation. So when you're inviting comparison to Nier Automata, a game that many players consider to tell one of the medium's most impactful stories, it's hard for your game not to pale in comparison, which is the exact trap Stellar Blade walks into. While Stellar Blade's story presents some compelling ideas, and there is a degree of intrigue to the story once you realise that not everything is quite as it seems at first glance with this world and the beings that inhabit it, try as it might, Stellar Blade just isn't able to match Nier's philosophical depth and nuance of writing. Stellar Blade's story touches on many familiar sci-fi tropes that have been done to death, asking what it means to be human, and raising the question, if synthetic beings have sentience, does that mean they also possess humanity? But we've seen these quandaries explored countless times, and explored far better than they are in Stellar Blade. To put it bluntly, Stellar Blade's story is not good. It's all over the place tonally, flip-flopping between melodramatic and goofy at the drop of a hat. The characterisation of its cast is muddled, with characters' personalities feeling inconsistent from scene to scene, with the writing for Adam in particular being a total mess, and Stellar Blade's story is painfully predictable. Stellar Blade's dialogue is also downright awful at times, which isn't helped by the often ropey English VO. While Eve herself is fine, much of the supporting cast leaves a lot to be desired. Because of this, I know many players chose to switch to the Korean VO, but I stuck with English because with Stellar Blade being such an action-heavy game, I didn't want to miss any important dialogue that popped up in fights while trying to play and read subtitles at the same time. One of the hallmarks of the Nier games is their inclusion of multiple endings that vastly expand on their stories. So of course, Stellar Blade also offers several endings. Stellar Blade has 3 possible endings depending on your choices, and I did get all 3 endings as I wanted the platinum for Stellar Blade. One of these endings is pretty definitively the canon ending, as it's much longer and more fleshed out than the others. However, without spoiling anything, I'll say that I was surprised by the choice that will lead you to this ending. At first glance, it doesn't necessarily seem like the objectively altruistic choice you'd expect to be offered at the end of a game, which I do like. It's far more interesting when games present you with decisions that aren't binary black and white, good or evil choices. It's why stories like the Mass Effect trilogy or Fallout New Vegas have stood the test of time. While 2 of the endings are based around a choice you make in the final moments of Stellar Blade, one of the game's endings can only be achieved by rushing through the game while doing minimal side content. Without spoiling anything, you should pay attention to Lily's progress bar that fills up as you complete side content throughout Stellar Blade, as you'll want it to be at 100% by the time you reach the end of the game. Though this should come naturally, as long as you're not blazing through the world without exploring. But because of this, even if you save scum and upload a cloud save before the final section of Stellar Blade, you'll still need a second playthrough to see the 3rd ending, as you'll need one save file where you've done everything along the way, and another where you've just bolted to the ending as quickly as possible. Thankfully, this process isn't overly time consuming, as you can get through Stellar Blade very quickly on a second playthrough. My first playthrough of Stellar Blade, where I did everything, took me a hair over 30 hours. My second was under 10 hours. While Stellar Blade's storytelling can't match Nier's, one area where Stellar Blade runs circles around Nier is with its combat. Stellar Blade's combat is excellent. Before its release, there was some debate over whether or not Stellar Blade is a Souls-like game, and I'd say it's pretty definitively not a Souls-like. Stellar Blade is more like a fusion between a Souls game and a more traditional character action game like Bayonetta or Ninja Gaiden. It's funny to be reviewing Stellar Blade right after Rise of the Ronin, as they're fairly similar in the influence they take from Souls games. Stellar Blade has a bonfire equivalent in its camps, where you rest, upgrade your skills, and buy supplies. And its healing stims function similarly to Dark Souls' Estus flasks, with you starting out with just a few, but finding items throughout the game that increase the maximum amount of stims you can carry. Stellar Blade's hyper-stylized combat feels superb. I'd go as far as to say that Stellar Blade's terrific combat mechanics make it one of the best action games in recent years. In Stellar Blade, you string together combos of light and heavy attacks, and perform a litany of special techniques known as beta attacks. Stellar Blade's responsive controls make it a delight to play, and its combat only gets better as you progress through the game and get the skill points required to unlock crucial abilities from Stellar Blade's skill tree, like the ability to dash through unblockable attacks and then instantly counter with a slash to your opponent's back. Of course, you can't always be on the offensive. You'll also need to carefully assess enemies' movements so you can parry their attacks, knocking them off balance, leaving them vulnerable for a punishing counterattack, complete with a showy finishing animation. Because no good action game is complete without a well-refined parry mechanic. However, some attacks are unparryable, and these ones need to be dodged. And if you dodge out of the way of attacks at the last possible second, you'll trigger a perfect dodge that slows down time for a second, which is very reminiscent of Bayonetta's Witch Time. Certain combat abilities are tied to story progression, like Eve's Tacky mode, which is Stellar Blade's equivalent to Kratos' Rage mode from the recent God of War games. While fighting, Eve charges up an energy bar that once filled can be used to activate this powered up state, where Eve takes no damage, gains additional attack power, and unlocks access to a series of new special techniques. Another clear parallel between Nier Automata and Stellar Blade is Eve's drone that constantly hovers alongside her. Like in Nier, the drone provides your ranged attack in Stellar Blade, though in Stellar Blade, it quite literally transforms into a gun to do so. And this is one way that Stellar Blade differentiates itself from the character action games that inspired it. While games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta have guns, they deal next to no damage, as their purpose is to keep your combo going as you close the distance between you and your opponent. Stellar Blade's gunplay functions more like a traditional third-person shooter, with Eve's gun doling out damage just as efficiently as her sword. It feels great to have a powerful ranged attack in this kind of game. I thought this was going to feel like a strange inclusion, but Shift Up nailed it, and the gunplay feels shockingly good. Though this was crucial to get right, as there are sections in Stellar Blade where Eve is stripped of her sword and forced to fight through an area with only her gun. You can imagine these sections being a low point, as they strip Eve of such a large percentage of her moveset, but they're given just enough variety by the various ammo types you can switch between. There are standard bullets, explosive shells, a shotgun blast, stinger missiles, and even a laser that needs to be charged up before you unleash it on enemies. Stellar Blade has some spectacular boss fights, and the bosses only get progressively better as you get deeper in. Stellar Blade's bosses showcase an impressive flair for creature design on the part of Shift Up's artists. I won't show footage of my favourite bosses to avoid spoilers as they come towards the end of Stellar Blade, but many of these bosses have incredible, nightmarish designs that would be right at home in a survival horror game. Some of my favourite examples of this are the Stalker, which has a chainsaw-shaped head with jagged spinning teeth protruding from it, and Karakuri, a very creepy Naytiba with an emotionless, doll-like face. Stellar Blade deserves commendation for its perfectly balanced difficulty. I wouldn't say Stellar Blade is a difficult game, but it does push back against you just enough to keep its fights engaging. While I rarely died and beat most of the bosses on my first attempt, I still had to approach these fights with caution as I figured out the boss's attack patterns, and I was often finishing these fights drained of my energy and with only a sliver of health remaining, giving me the satisfaction of a hard-won battle without ever pushing me to the point of frustration. Stellar Blade is crammed with memorable, action-heavy set pieces. Whether it's going toe-to-toe with towering foes, or running through environments as they collapse around you, Stellar Blade never fails to provide a sense of spectacle. Some of these more cinematic sequences implement QuickTime events, but Stellar Blade utilises its QTEs well, showing restraint and never overdoing it with too many of them, so you don't feel like the game's constantly ripping control away from you. While Stellar Blade is primarily focused on combat, it's also filled with an unexpected amount of platforming segments. Stellar Blade's platforming isn't remarkable, but it's more than serviceable. There are times when the platforming can feel a little imprecise, but I never found it as cumbersome and clunky as some others did, and I found myself genuinely enjoying these sections more often than not. There's a great feeling of momentum as you swing from pole to pole or glide through pipes while riding atop Eve's sword. When these platforming segments are at their best, Stellar Blade reminded me of the action-adventure games of the PS2 era in the best way possible. Much like the combat, Stellar Blade's traversal only gets better as the game progresses, and you gain access to new abilities like the double jump and wall run. However, a slight nitpick I have is that your double jump won't break your fall, which goes against what games have taught me for my entire life. Occasionally, Stellar Blade breaks up its action with the odd puzzle. These puzzles are usually very straightforward, tasking you with finding a passcode for a locked door, jumping between collapsing platforms in the right order based on the symbols displayed on them, or rotating then hosing paint off of a train car to get a code from the side of it. There's even one odd Bioshock-style pipe puzzle for some reason. While most of these puzzles are breezy and won't slow you down for too long, there are a couple of strangely obtuse puzzles hidden within its side missions that require you to solve some surprisingly complex math equations that I absolutely just googled the answers for. Stellar Blade is uniquely structured, as it alternates between linear areas and large open regions full of side activities where you can explore freely. I should once again stress that you shouldn't rush through these open sections, not only because completing activities in these areas is how you fill Lily's progress bar, which has a bearing on the story, but also because you'll find upgrades in these areas to strengthen Eve, which will make life much easier for you in the final chunk of Stellar Blade. There are also 48 collectible cans, and finding these will unlock further upgrades, as well as new cosmetic items. For much of Stellar Blade, your hub is the city of Zion. Here, you'll find merchants like information broker Roxanne, who runs the R-Shop, where you can pay for tips on where to find crucial items in Stellar Blade's open areas, as well as a plethora of quest givers in need of Eve's help. But like many games, the quality of Stellar Blade's side missions fluctuates wildly from one mission to the next. Some are surprisingly engaging, while others are utter slop. While I enjoyed following the story of robotic lounge singer Enya, I grew tired of the many side quests that are literal fetch quests where someone tells you to go somewhere, you walk 100 meters to investigate the place, then go straight back to the quest giver to report your findings. And an almost comedic amount of Stellar Blade's early side quests boil down to someone asking Eve to find a missing person, you following the quest marker only to come across the person's corpse, then returning to the quest giver to tell them that the person they're looking for is dead. This exact scenario happens over and over again. It has to occur at least 5 times within the first couple of batches of side quests in Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade's side content is another area where Shift Up deserves credit for showing restraint. At 35 side missions, Stellar Blade isn't as egregiously bloated as many other games of this generation. However, if you are looking to kill some more time in Stellar Blade's world, there's also a fully featured fishing minigame. I love how out of pocket Stellar Blade's fishing becomes once you start getting new bait types and slowly work your way from catching goldfish and mud skippers to great whites and whale sharks. And if you want a 100% Stellar Blade, you're going to be spending a good few hours fishing. One tiny detail I very much appreciated in Stellar Blade was its thoughtful use of the DualSense's touchpad. Much like The Witcher 3, sliding your thumb along the touchpad in different directions will bring up different screens, with a swipe up showing your map and a swipe down bringing up your mission list. Very few games make good use of the touchpad. After the very early days of the PS4, when developers were experimenting with it, most studios just started treating the touchpad as one big button to bring up a pause menu or map. So it always stands out when a studio goes beyond this. One complaint I have about Stellar Blade revolves around its maps, or its occasional lack thereof. While most areas have maps, there are a few areas that don't. This is a baffling choice that leads to some annoyance when you're on the hunt for collectibles. Between these missing maps in Stellar Blade, and Starfield having to patch in its local area maps, this is becoming a frustrating trend. Be warned, there are 2 points of no return in Stellar Blade, and you can miss side missions and collectibles if you haven't completed them before these points. Fortunately, Stellar Blade gives you ample warning when you're about to cross these points of no return, so you shouldn't miss out on anything you don't want to. Stellar Blade is every bit as stylish as its trailers promised it would be, with its art direction being on point in every regard. I think one of the reasons Stellar Blade stood out right off the bat was thanks to its striking character designs, with Eve herself being one of the coolest looking protagonists in recent memory. Stellar Blade presents plenty of opportunities to customise Eve's appearance to your liking. You can alternate between a long and short version of Eve's hair from the jump, and if you're bothered by clipping, you might want to switch to the shorter ponytail, as the longer version frequently clips through her clothing, and eventually you'll come across a side mission that unlocks a hairstylist who can style and dye Eve's hair. You can also craft a ton of different outfits for Eve, some of which are goofy, like the giant teddy bear costume, while others are very revealing, like the bunny suit and the various swimsuits you can put Eve in. And I guess this is where I should address one of the major sticking points of Stellar Blade, which is that Eve, as well as several other female characters, are objectively very sexualized. This, and the comical amount of jiggle physics in certain cutscenes, have been a large part of the discourse surrounding this game. I'm a very progressive person, but personally, I don't have any problem with the suggestive character design. As far as I'm concerned, developers should be able to make whatever art they want to. If you want to make something with a sexualized character like Stellar Blade or Bayonetta, great. If you want to make a game that tackles important social issues like Life is Strange or Gone Home, awesome. I played and enjoyed all of these games. If a game looks interesting to me, I'm going to play it. I think so much of the discourse around games has gotten so toxic in recent years, and 90% of the time, there's no need for these arguments to begin with. Sometimes you just need to realise that certain games aren't for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. Anyways, sorry about the little rant, but I guess this is just a topic that's been on my mind a lot lately. Now, to get back on track. As I mentioned when discussing the boss fights, Stellar Blade also features some spectacular creature design, with the grotesque designs for its demented Naytiba rivaling what you'd find in a Resident Evil or Dead Space game. Even excluding the bosses where you'll find the most memorable creatures, Stellar Blade is packed with strange, creative enemies, like the monstrous crustacean enemies and the body bag enemies that squirm along the floor before exploding. But it's always the small touches that truly elevate a game's sense of style, and this is something that Shift Up completely understands, with the little flourishes like the way Eve's sword is formed from her hair clips whenever a fight begins, truly making Stellar Blade's look pop. Stellar Blade's world has no shortage of interesting environments to explore as you traverse the ruins of human civilization. There's an eeriness to venturing through business districts, libraries, offices, and even an opera house that are all now dilapidated and lost to time. Though the fidelity of these environments is massively uneven, with the large open areas often being filled with ugly, low-res textures. One of Stellar Blade's strongest aspects is its extraordinary soundtrack. Stellar Blade's music is another area where Nier's influence on Stellar Blade shines through brightly. There is a good reason for the striking similarities here though. While Stellar Blade's score was partially arranged in-house at Shift Up, a large chunk was composed by Studio Monaca, the team of musicians led by Keiichi Okabe, the man behind the music of the Nier games. This soundtrack, complete with its strangely haunting vocals, provides an atmosphere that ties Stellar Blade's world together. It's also a highly varied soundtrack. While many of the tracks in Stellar Blade are reminiscent of Nier, its more upbeat tracks have a strong Persona flavour. Between Stellar Blade, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Persona 3 Reload, 2024 might have the best lineup of video game soundtracks I've ever heard. Stellar Blade feels like a modern PS2 game in the best way possible. It's a game that's first and foremost concerned with being a fun experience over everything else. While Stellar Blade's story never reaches the heights of the games that inspired it, its masterful combat and unparalleled sense of style makes Stellar Blade one of the best action games in recent history, and one of the PS5's greatest exclusives. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can find countless other videos on my channel, including my recent reviews of Rise of the Ronin and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming videos, where I'll be taking a look at the biggest games still to come in 2024, and reviewing Senua's Saga Hellblade 2.